In fairy tale, there's a lot of characters that get looked over, and one of the characters I want to talk about is Zeref, a final boss that appeared way earlier than he should have, but it worked out for everyone. Now, Zeref is known as a few things, like Black Wizard or Emperor Spriggan, and we look at his exhausting journey. Well, you know why. Speaking of which, let's talk about who Zeref is and why he's the way he is exactly. Now, like I said, Zeref was introduced fairly early, with his first appearance being in chapter 200. Now, I know you may be thinking chapter 200 isn't early, but this manga is over 500 chapters, longer if you include a 100-year quest. Anyway, you first see Zero. He shows that he doesn't really want to be bothered, especially because of his curse. That changed though when Altair seeks him out. This is just one reason why he stopped being in solitude and starts to act, but really the main reason is his backstory. And you see this in chapter 436, showing how he was a child born in a much earlier time. Not only that, but he was an incredibly smart child, coming up with theories about magic that revolves around life and death, even though that was taboo though, so it wasn't really allowed. He still wanted to study though, no matter the consequences, or despite being told to stop on multiple occasions because this could be seen as offensive to their god. And if you're wondering why he felt so strong to study this type of magic, well, it was to bring his little brother back who died tragically, along with his parents. Everything has its consequences though, because he was cursed with the curse of contradiction for continuing to study this magic. And if you're wondering what the curse of contradiction is, meaning basically when he preserved life, everything living dies around him, in a certain radius that is, meaning that he has to stop preserving life. Or in other words, he basically just has to stop giving a fuck what goes on around him. Also, side note, this curse actually made him immortal too, forcing him to go on to live for over 400 years, most of the time in solitude. Because of this though, he was able to get a lot of research, but because he was alive for so long, he eventually wanted, death, because of the whole curse of contradiction things. So he did the obvious smart thing, and broke more taboos, and created life, with the hope of one of them being able to be strong enough to kill him. During his time though, when he was, creating demons, the last demons he ever created was END, aka Nasu, the main character, or one of them, depending on how you view it. He made Nasu as a reincarnation from his younger brother, and he was the most powerful demon Zeref had ever made. And since it was basically a reincarnation of his brother, Zeref basically thought of Nasu as his brother even though he created him, because he looked exactly like his brother. So he called Nasu by brother and such. Everything wasn't always bad for Zeref, by the way. He did end up meeting Mavis, well, kinda. He met Mavis for a short period of time, and then things went wrong. She became immortal. They hook up, and then everything went to shit. And the reason for that is, to save her friends, Mavis ended up breaking taboos and ended up with the same curse as Zero. And since both of them are kind of outcasts, who are immortal at that, and kills anything around them, they become a couple. A surprisingly happy one too. But this shit is supposed to be tragic, because Mavis dies by Zero curse. And I know what you're thinking. How does she die if she's supposed to be immortal like him? Well, the answer is he loved her too much, that his curse outdid her immortality and killed her, because Zero felt way more love for her than she did for him, which is kind of understandable. At this point, he lived way longer than her. By the way, they did end up having a kid together, with that being August, arguably the strongest person who was a part of Zeref's army in the war arc, which makes sense since he's the son of two of the most powerful wizards in the show. Anyway, Zeref's life continued to be rocky road until the very end of original fairy tale, where after the war, he's finally able to die and gets his peace and the family he wanted in the afterlife. So I guess everything wasn't always bad, because in the afterlife he was reunited with Mavis, August, and even Lockhart, another son he had. Now that's basically it for the story, or at least Zeref, because he does show in the 100-year quest arc, but kind of briefly from what I've seen. But there is one more thing to talk about, and that is, how strong is Zeref exactly? Because you see, at the end of the first fairy tale, or the original one before the 100-year quest, Zeref, in my opinion, is the second strongest, right behind Anthologia. Which makes sense since he's been alive for over 400 years. He has access to multiple magic like teleportation, black, living magic, which allows him to create beings like the terrorists. He even has regeneration to a certain degree. Even with all that shit, He has law. Now, if you're wondering what law is, it's basically an ancient magic that pronounces magical judgment upon a person, meaning that if he feels someone is evil, he can use law and instantly kill them, add on his curse, and I don't feel like there are many characters that can beat Zeref besides Antilothia. Now, I'm not entirely caught up with the 100-year quest arc, but as far as to my knowledge, even the dragon gods wouldn't pose a threat. The only person who I can think of being a threat to him right now is probably the white mage, but again, I have to keep reading just to be sure. But besides that, how do you feel about Zeref? But that's basically it.